In 1837, 3 Comanche, 2 men and a woman, were camped alone one night in a teepee on the clear fork of the Brazos, called the Esese-Pa, or Wooden Arrow Point River. During the night, one of them noticed the door flap raise and then quickly drop again. He told the others, and as silently and swiftly as possible they crept out under the back of the teepee, jumped over a steep bank of the creek and hid themselves just a moment before their enemies fired into the now empty teepee. The Comanche returned the fire from their hiding place and then made their escape to a Kiowa camp nearby. In the morning, the Kiowa returned to the spot, together with the Comanche, and found a dead Arapaho lying where he had been shot the night before. They scalped and beheaded him and brought the head into camp dragging at the end of a reata. The old German captive, Kiowa Dutch or Boy Nadal, which translates to Big Blonde, then a little boy and who had been with the Indians about 2 years, witnessed this spectacle and still remembers the thrill of horror which it sent through him. He had been kidnapped by the Kiowa at the age of 8 in 1835. His parents, who had only arrived from Germany 3 years before, were killed during the raid. He lived as a Kiowa his whole life and was only discovered when his band of Kiowa moved on to the reservation. A Kiowa picture shows the winter of 1837. That winter is called the winter that they dragged the head. Kiowa Dutch lived the rest of his life on the reservation. He was born in Europe but died on a cold U.S. prairie as a Kiowa, surrounded by his people. Today, I thought we could open up the old gun case and look at a few Colt 6-shooters from the 1880s. In 1873, the Wild West became even more dangerous with the introduction of the new Colt 45 single-action Army revolver. No longer did a man have to measure powder, load it, and ram a ball and apply a percussion cap. Now all he had to do was reach for a self-contained cartridge on his belt, put it in the gun, and fire, all in a fraction of the time it previously took. Others had pioneered the self-contained cartridge years before, but Colt perfected it for use in their new revolver. The first single-action Army revolvers were delivered to the cavalry for use on the frontier, chambered in the new powerful 45 long Colt caliber. It was a warrior stopper. 2 months later, the revolvers were offered to the public for $13 each, and for an extra $3 more the customer could buy the holster and ammunition to go with it. And as they say, the rest is history. Lawmen, gunslingers, warriors, outlaws, cowboys, and pioneers all desired the new, robust gun, and Colt delivered. Cowboys could walk into practically any hardware store in America and buy this gun. Traders bought multiple revolvers for trading with the Indians. Hundreds were taken as the spoils of victory after the Battle of the Little Bighorn. Possible Custer revolvers taken at the battle in the range of serial numbers 4,500 to roughly 5,500. If a customer wanted a bit of bling on his gun, he could write to Colt and order a revolver with fancy ivory or mother-of-pearl grips, a nickel finish, and any amount of master engraving he could afford. This revolver from 1881 left the factory with nickel plating, but after 143 years, the nickel is all but gone, leaving this pleasing patina. It is one of my guns that has seen some serious use, but has been looked after. The end of the barrel is slightly worn on one side, like many are, from years of slipping in and out of a holster. The other old revolver here was made in 1880. It originally had a 7.5-inch barrel, but someone over the years cut it down to gunfighter length. The front sight was never put back on, which was a thing back in the day, as it aided a fast, snag-free draw and the sight wasn't needed when shooting at just a few feet. It would be nice to think this gun was cut by a gunfighter at that time, but it could have been done at any time in the last 144 years. The revolvers from pre-1900 are mostly all black powder guns. Black powder is a very inefficient propellant. When firing a black powder gun, less than half of the combustion inside the cartridge is converted into gas to push the bullet. The rest ends up as cinders, lots of flame, and white smoke. The smoke from a few black powder guns could fill a saloon in seconds and linger for hours. The residue left behind on the guns after shooting black powder is hydrophilic. It attracts water, and as it attracts moisture from the air, it can end up causing rust in the gun. The mixture of powder residue and moisture also turns into hydroxides, which corrodes gun barrels and cylinders. Apart from chemical attack on the surface of the guns, they were prone to gum up if left uncleaned. So most people with the need for a reliable weapon took cleaning their equipment seriously. Many on the frontier learned to keep their guns clean years before while serving in the Civil War. Most Old West gun care involved cleaning with boiling water and applying whale oil, bear, or seal fat afterwards. The boiling water poured into barrels and cylinders heats the metal to a high temperature. This releases contaminants stuck to the metal, and once the cleaning is complete, the moisture left on the gun is quickly evaporated by the heat left in the metal. A small piece of cloth on the end of a rod pushed down the barrel a few times would complete the clean. Of course, just like now, by choice or otherwise, many people would leave their guns uncleaned. Most guns could survive not being cleaned a while if they were operating in an arid climate or were very well oiled. But today, we see many old guns from that period that have terrible barrels and pitted metal from neglect. Although a gun could cost a month's wage, the harsh life of a revolver exposed to the elements took its toll. Many guns found today were ridden hard and put up wet, an old horse term used to describe a gun being left in a damp holster. Such guns usually have fine pitting over the entire surface. Smokeless powder came into widespread use around the turn of the century. The faster, more efficient burning powder could send a bullet on its way at greater speed with a flatter trajectory, making it more deadly, accurate, and without all the smoke. Colt has now been producing this revolver across 3 centuries, and it is perhaps one of the most recognized guns in the world. Collectors often say we are just the custodians of these old relics of history, and I love having the opportunity to keep these historic items safe and maintained before it's time to pass them on to their new carers. It's important to note that if you ever acquire an antique or old gun to never polish or vigorously clean it, it can take hundreds of years to develop a nice patina on the metal of a gun, and just 15 minutes to ruin it with someone armed with good intentions and polish and rag. Old guns are not meant to look like Liberace's bracelets. My favorite Colt saying is "God made man. Sam Colt made them equal." Warren Earp, The youngest of the four Earp brothers, whose names 20 years ago were synonymous with gunfighting on the Arizona frontier, died with his boots on here. He was shot through the heart in a saloon by cowboy Johnny Boyett and died almost instantly. The shooting occurred early in the morning and grew out of a feud that had existed between the two men ever since the bloody fights between the Earps and Arizona cattle rustlers about Tombstone in the early 80s. Earp had habitually bullied Boyett for months past, and the latter always tried to avoid a quarrel. A few days ago, Earp cornered Boyett in a saloon and, pressing a revolver against Boyett's stomach, made him promise that if they ever quarreled again, the one should kill the other. The two men met in a restaurant, and Earp began his abuse. Boyett went into an adjoining saloon, followed by Earp. The latter said, "Boyett, go get your gun and we'll settle the matter right here. I've got my gun, go get yours." Boyett was willing and agreed to return in a few moments and fight it out. Earp also left the saloon. Boyett returned very soon, and finding Earp gone, warned all loungers in the saloon to clear out, emphasizing his warning by shooting into the ceiling. Earp shortly appeared through a back door. He started toward Boyett, throwing open his coat and saying, "Boyett, I am unarmed. You have the best of this," advancing as he spoke. Boyett warned him not to come nearer, but Earp did not heed the words, and when within 8 feet, Boyett fired, shooting Earp through the heart and killing him instantly. Warren Earp was the youngest brother of the Earp family. He was well known by Sheriff Paul of Tucson, who was sheriff of Pima County in the 80s when trouble occurred between the Earps and the Clanton gang. Earp came to this country about the time of the beginning of the feud from Colt and Cal. He was one of the original brothers and took an active part in their fights after he arrived. Morgan Earp was killed in 1883 in Bob Hatch's saloon in Tombstone, being shot from the back as he was playing billiards. Virgil Earp later was shot in the arm and seriously wounded, and the killing of Frank Stillwell occurred in Tucson not long after, when he attempted to shoot Virgil through a car window. Stillwell was shot by Wyatt Earp. Warren came here when his brothers got into trouble at Tombstone with the Clanton gang, and he has remained here since. He was driving stage from Wilcox to Fort Grant and had done freighting.
I rode a horse for George Harper one day. He sent me word to catch up a big sorrel and break him, and he'd give me $10. I got that horse up and brought him up to where I lived and tied him up, and next morning I rode him. Some people came to the house and was watching. That old horse sure was pitching, and I heard these people say, "Oh, he ain't pitching hard. His legs is too stiff." Well, they ought to have been on him. I had a new saddle and the saddle pockets tied on with buckskin strings, and when he quit pitching, both pockets were on one side. The next day, he got to pitching and jumped up and fell right back and buried the saddle horn in the sand. But he didn't get me. Then I got on him and rode him through a lot of thickets, and I noticed he kept flinching, so I decided to get that flinch out of him when I got in the clearing. The grass burrs were knee-high, so I give him a cut with my quirt, and he throwed me right in those grass burrs. There was nobody to see it, so I picked the burrs out and got on him to whip the pitch out of him. But he wouldn't pitch. That was the last time he pitched with me. But he was mean. And the father of that horse couldn't be rode. He would pitch a man to death. I knew at least 2 men that took hemorrhages from trying to ride that horse. Tom Mills.
It was a spirited scene, an animated picture. As the command wound along the trail and our strong scent was carried down the fresh wind in their direction, the buffalo commenced to raise their heads in alarm. The old leaders of each herd seemed to give them a warning, and immediately the whole mass was set in motion. This had been repeated several times during the day. It does not appear to be generally known, even among naturalists and writers on the habits of animals, that the buffalo, when alarmed, will always cross the trail of his supposed enemy and get to leeward, but they would never pass to the rear of that enemy, or of a moving body, whether of a wagon train, pack train, cavalry, or infantry column. Crowding with a reckless and resistless brute energy, each herd, therefore, with its chosen leader, gradually worked along towards the head of our leading company, until at length it brought them in front of the entire command. Our march was blocked, and we were compelled to halt to bide the time of our beast companions. Further progress was utterly impossible. Mackenzie, becoming somewhat impatient at this suddenly enforced blockade, because our camp for the night had already been selected, and we still had many miles to march, seized a carbine from one of the men, and dismounting, attempted, by firing at the heads of the herds, to break them and swerve the immense throng from the headlong course, now so crowding upon the advanced company as to become positively dangerous, the horses showing great fear and becoming almost unmanageable. He fired several shots. The nearest herds swerved, but, now contrary to their instincts, came roaring down beside and parallel to our mounted troopers. This was a little too much, even for well-trained, disciplined cavalry soldiers, and the men, in their intense excitement, forgetful of orders, commenced a rattling fusillade from their saddles. The buffalo veered off, but not until several had been killed and wounded. The men were sternly ordered to cease firing. One gigantic bull, a leader, was nearest. He was badly wounded. As was the case on nearly all marches of troops changing station on the frontier, many dogs of all ages, sizes, colors, and degrees of character and temperament, always an undesirable accumulation at every frontier post, the men raising them for companions and pets, had, under protest, accompanied the column on its march. At the Colorado River, many of the most worthless curs were drowned when fording it, or left behind, but there were still several remaining, and it was these that had turned the buffalo down the column. There was among them a large, white English bulldog, weighing about 75 pounds, belonging to the regimental band. He was a powerful brute, and had been trained to pull down beeves at the slaughter corral at Fort Concho, seizing them always by the nose. He was, withal, a prime favorite with the soldiers, notwithstanding his ferocity. The pack of mongrel dogs were in full cry after the stampeding herds of bellowing beasts as they rushed and tore along the column with their peculiar stiff, legged rolling gait. But King, the bulldog, singled an immense wounded leader who had now slackened his speed and was faltering in his tracks. He sprang at his head with great courage, fastened upon him, and the battle commenced with the mounted column as silent spectators. It was a most novel spectacle. The bronze troopers, the great shaggy beasts thundering by, the white-topped wagon train closed up and halted, the fleeting shadows and the almost limitless stretch of surrounding prairie and vast solitude. The bull went down upon his knees, but so great was his strength that he quickly rose and whirled the dog in great circles over his head. King had been taught never to let go. The entire command now watched with almost breathless attention the apparently unequal struggle, expecting to see the dog crushed to death. Down went the bull again on his knees, this time not from any weakness, but to gore the dog. Rising, he would stamp his feet in rage, then shaking him for a while, he would resume swinging and snapping him like a whipcord through the air. The foam, now bloody, flecked the long, tawny beard of the bison bull. His eyes, nearly concealed in the long, matted hair that covered his shaggy head, flashed fire, and his rage knew no bounds. The dog, which had begun the fight a pure white, had now turned to a spotted crimson from blood which had flowed from the buffalo's wounds, mixed with alkali dust. And still his brute instincts, tenacious courage and training led him to hold on. Had he let go for a moment, the crazed bull would have gored and trampled him to death before he could have retreated. The bull was now, however, growing perceptibly weaker. He rose to his feet less often. He could no longer throw the dog in circles above his head. The blood stained King to a more vivid red and begrimed with froth and dirt. He had lost all semblance to his former self. All were looking for the struggle to end. The suspense was beginning to be painful. Impatience was already displayed upon the men's faces, when suddenly Mackenzie shouted, "Kill the animal and put him out of his misery." It was a merciful command. 2 men stepped forward to the enormous beast, now on his knees, swaying and rocking to and fro. The dog, still holding on, and placing their carbines behind the shoulder to reach a vital point, fired. He gave one great quiver, one last spasmodic rocking, and spread himself upon the vast prairie dead. Not till then did King let go. So great had been the courage of this favorite dog in his fearful struggle that months after, when a post order annually issued for all cur dogs, an accumulative nuisance at all frontier posts, to be exterminated, King, the white bulldog belonging to the 4th Cavalry Band, was exempted by a special paragraph for his gallant conduct. Robert G. Carter.